to do that, of course, up in Google, I just put in a search for Swift. Of course, you could make it even more. You could say Apple Swift, Swift programming language. And this is what you want to get here. You want to get, notice that it's from apple.com. So here we go. Let's click on this. And the current version, I believe, is 2.1. So if you need to, you can, at your convenience, take a read on some of this. But what I want to show you today is the Swift Tour. So come on down here and click the Swift Tour, and there it is. And here you can read and take a look at their examples. And it's got a little breakout box here, a little note that says that for the best experience, open this chapter as a playground in Xcode. Now, to do this tour in Xcode, you're going to need to be on an Apple machine, an Apple computer, not an iOS device. Okay, and but if you are so fortunate to have an Apple computer, like I do, I'm quite fortunate. I've been very blessed to have this awesome MacBook Pro that I've had for a few years. It's been really great. That you'd come here and download the Playground. Okay, there it goes. And let's see if the Playground came down that quick. Yeah, it came down that quick because basically it's primarily just text. All right, so it's no big deal. Double click it. Let's see if I did that right. Yep, and it looks like it's trying to open. I'm going to say yes to this. This is from the internet because I trust it. It's from Apple. If I can't trust Apple, I'm in trouble. And there we are. It's that simple. So now we're in Xcode in the Swift Tour. So I'm going to see if I can maximize that. There it is. It's maximized. And here we are. We're in Xcode, and it was easy, as you saw, just a couple button pushes, and boom, it opened in Xcode. And by the way, you know, you have to keep everything up to date on your computer. The real easy way to make sure everything is up to date is just going to the App Store and coming up here and clicking Updates. Mine is up to date, so everything's up to date on my computer. The operating system, the Xcode, and that's what you're going to want to do. My version of Xcode, and today's date, this is what, December 30th, 2015, is version 7.2. Okay? Now all these things get updated. That's how technology is. They're constantly being updated. You've got to keep the stuff up to date and kind of be aware of that whole process. Enough said about that. Let's get going on the tour. Okay, so you know, the very first thing is they do a print of the hello world. Look how easy it is to print something. You got to put it in quotes because it's a string, which we'll talk about if you're not familiar with the term string. That's a data type. So hopefully all those things will be covered. And I'm gearing this primarily for people who not only are new to Swift, sorry about my voice frogging out on us, but also people are just new to programming. To me, this would be a good place for people that are new to programming. And so if you're new to programming, you won't have to worry about C or Objective-C, because that's for people that have worked in those languages. And there's a number of advantages with this, so let's cook through it. Okay, we're kind of reading as we go. Here's some simple values. Let and var. Label constant doesn't need to be known at compile time. some of those terms, you don't have to hang your hat on, be familiar with, for example, what compile is. If you're new to programming, I wouldn't even sweat that for now. But a var is a variable. You have to. This is declaring the variable, and this is called camel case, where my variable is actually two words made into one, and they've capitalized the second word. That's called a camel case because it goes up like that. So these terms you pick up over time working with coding. So don't sweat it if you don't if these terms are new to you. And so what's really cool about this playground is as you make changes over on the left, notice over on the right, it does it live. We didn't have to do anything else except make the change. It's rather incredible, I would say. So with a variable, you can reassign the value, but you can't do that with what's called a constant. And a constant is identified by the fact that it uses this let keyword. Let means it's going to be a constant. Okay, and you can't change it. So you see how we did this up here? The var is my variable is 42, and then we reassign because this is an assignment statement. Over on the right, we've given it a 50 now, and of course, so that my variable is now going to become 50. Initially it was 42. Now it's going to be 50 because because of how we assign that. We can do that with a variable, but if we try to do that with a constant, let's give it a try. My constant, how's my spelling this morning? And let's do basically the same thing. It gives us an error. You get this little red bubble over on the left. You can't now assign to value. My constant is a let constant. See? You can't do that. So, but that's cool. It gave us the error, and it told us what the issue was, pretty much. And so there we are. We're learning about, and of course you're going to want to read this text that they're showing here. But I think this is just fantastic. So, as a learning tool, and so let's continue. Constant, same type that variable must have the same type as the value you want to assign it. Yeah. You don't have to write the type explicitly. See, so that's another cool thing about Swift. It'll imply what the type is. You don't have to tell it, for example, that it's an integer or a double. If you're familiar with those data types, and if not, again, we'll just kind of follow along. You'll pick it up as we go. My variable is an integer because its initial value is an integer. See, it implied the variable type as an integer, and we didn't even have to explicitly tell it that it was an integer. Now down here we did. Explicit double. We explicitly told it that it was a double. So now they're going to give us these little experiments to do. I highly recommend that you do those. Okay, that's very helpful. Those are learning opportunities, and don't sweat it if there's something that you can't do. And I'll show you how easy it is. If it's not working out, you can just easily back out of whatever didn't work. So this is a beautiful learning environment. So implicit integer, yes. Implicit double, because we have the dot 0, 70.0. then that implies that it's a double. This third one or last one is explicitly declaring it as a double. Okay? It's fun. I'm starting to get this terminology down a little bit, and it's really fun. I love the terminology. And I hope you also embrace the terminology as you pick it up. It'll build your confidence. It'll help you to learn the concepts. There would be so many benefits to learning the terminology as we do this coding. So create a constant with an explicit type of float and a value of 4. Okay. So, all right, and create a constant. So if it's a constant, then we have to use the keyword let, because I'm doing the experiment now, just as they're asking me to do. So create a constant with an explicit type of float and a value of 4. So I'm going to follow along with the examples that they've given, and I'm going to say explicit float. Because it's an explicit float, I'm going to be explicit. Okay? Explicit means that we're not going to imply it. We're going to tell it that it's a float. And a value of 4. Okay? So I'm cool with that. Very comfortable that that's correct. And finally it says values are never implicitly converted to another type. If you need to convert a value to a different type, explicitly make an instance of the desired type. Let label the width is, when you see something in quotes there that's going to be text, that's called a string. String is the data type, is how I would say it. Let width equals 94. 94 is going to be an integer. So values are never implicitly converted to another type. If you need to convert a value to a different type, explicitly make an instance of the desired type. Okay, well, we'll just kind of roll with that if it's something that we don't grasp at the moment. Let width label equal label, which is now, what would we call that? Oh, well, label's a constant. See? We declared it up here. We declared the constant with the let keyword, and we gave it the name label, and we assigned this over here to the right, the width is. So now down here, let width label equal the label, which is the width is, plus, and in this case, what we're doing here, where it says string width, well, because width we initially created as a constant integer, so that 94 was assigned to the constant width. But if we just said width, I'll show you what will happen. See, that's what makes this so nice as a learning tool. We get an error here if we try to do that. Why? Well, because these two types are not compatible, and the Swift wouldn't know what to do with this, you see, because you're trying to what we call concatenate or add with that plus symbol the label, which is the width is, which what data type is that? That's a string, you see, whereas this constant width is not a string, it's an integer. So you can't concatenate or add those. And if you try to, you're going to get an error, and this is what it's going to say. The binary operator cannot be applied to operands of type string and int. They're incompatible. That's why we have to put it back the way it was, which I'm going to attempt to do here if it'll let me. Let's see here. Shouldn't be a problem. Should be easy. Easy as can be, in fact. I'm just going to go right to it. String. Put my parentheses back. Okay. And we're back in business. So we learn from that. Okay. And that's the whole idea. The whole idea is the learning. The learning, not just learning the Swift programming language, but if you're new to programming, excuse me, is we're going to learn how to code. We're going to learn how to code in the Swift programming language using this awesome tool called a playground. This is what this is called here. Let's continue. Experiment. Try removing the conversion to string from the last line. What error did you get? Well, that's kind of what we just did, so we won't revisit that. And then we move on. There's an even simpler way to include values in strings. Write the value in parentheses. I apologize about my voice, so too bad. Write the value in parentheses and write a backslash before the parentheses, for example. Now this is cool. Check this out. There's actually a term for this. It's called, I believe it's called string interpolation, which again, I'm into the terminology. So this first line here, again, we're just declaring a constant with a let, assigning the value of 3, which is an integer. Doing the same thing for oranges, which is the apples and oranges. Those are constants that we're assigning these integer values to. The third line, let apple summary equal, and now this whole thing is a string. See, because it's in double quotes. But look what we're doing. We say I have, and then you got the backslash, and then the value of the apples constant, that that term in the parentheses. Apples. I have, and so look what happens over there. It's able to grab the 3 when you do it that way. Isn't that cool? That's called string interpolation. That's a feature of the Swift programming language that we want to be familiar, because that shows up all over the place. But it's might look a little weird initially, perhaps, but you'll get it, because you'll have lots of opportunity. You'll see this. And so let's see what it has us to do, because the fourth line is the same concept. They've just changed the sentence, and they've doubled up on the apples and oranges, and it added it. Okay, it did a little math operation. So now it shows over to the right. It shows I have 8 pieces of fruit. Pretty cool, huh? So for the experiment, to include a floating point calculation in a string and to include someone's name in a greeting. So let's think about that. To include a floating point calculation. Well, that would mean that the terms that you're adding are floating point in a string and to include someone's name in a greeting. Huh. Well, let's think about that a minute. Okay, so I could say, one of the things you can do is don't get hung up. Just try stuff. Just jump in and try stuff based on what you're understanding. So one of the things I could do is let my name equals Dave. So that would be one thing I could do. I don't even know if that's necessary, but for this experiment, but we'll see. Okay, and we'll change it if it turns out that that's not necessary. To include a floating point calculation. And we're going to use this example up here. could say floating point. Well, look how we did a floating point up here. And that seemed to be okay. They didn't really cover what a float was, but we were able to do it this way. Okay, so we could do it this way. Let's see if this makes sense to you. At least I could say, well, actually, we could do, could we just change these? I'm kind of cheating a little bit, aren't I? And see, that gave us an error when I changed that to an explicit float, because I'm trying to add, down here I'm trying to add an explicit float to an integer, which is the oranges. So let's see if this fixes it. If I explicitly make that a float, and yes, it did. Okay, so now I've assigned, and I'll say let new fruit summary equal let new fruit summary equal let's see, how would that be? Yeah, see, that won't, I can't just put it my name, see, I can't do that. I have to use this interpolation method, and I don't know if that's going to work for this, but let's try it. That's what this is all about, is trying stuff. That willingness to experiment is going to help us to learn. And sure enough, if you look over at the right, it worked, because you could see that it now over to the right it shows Dave. Even though over here I didn't put Dave, I used the interpolation method. Pretty cool, huh? Okay, but we're not done. So my name, and then I'm going to add it to something else, to the actual text. I'll say Dave has, and I'm going to just do the same operation that was above, because I'm lazy, right? We all know that. And it has apples plus oranges. So it's going to say, ultimately what I'm shooting for is Dave has the 8 pieces of fruit. You know what? I really like this. This isn't my first time doing this. Each time I do this, I just gain a little more confidence with it, which is exactly what, that is the process of learning. Okay, so I'm comfortable with that. I think I did what they were asking to do as far as the experiment down here. And I made it real easy on myself. Yeah, so we can push on. Okay, so I'm going to stop this video and take a little bit of a break.